So good morning, everyone, to lecture number 5, I believe. What we did last week, we talked about stream ciphers the last 2 weeks, and what we're going to do today, we start about block ciphers. That means if we want to resynchronize and look where we are in this field of cryptography. You don't have to, you can copy that, but you've seen that a few times. It's just to give you an idea where we are in the lecture, einordnen. So there was this thing with symmetric algorithms. The other topic is asymmetric and protocols. That's our worldview on cryptography. And what we did so far, we did some introduction stuff, and then we talked about a little bit more seriously about stream ciphers. And stream ciphers, long story made short. Hello. Deal is, if you need to talk, don't come to the lecture, please. Videos are online, German, English. There's no reason to come if you don't want to listen. We did stream cipher so far, okay? In reality, in the real world, in practice, internet browser, banking, blah, 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 probably 95% is using case B, namely block ciphers. And that's what we're going to do today, okay? So, this is the timeline of this 2-semester lecture. No. It's week number 5, okay? And we're going to stay here for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, I believe, okay? Close to around Christmas, we will be done with block ciphers, okay? There are 2 big important block ciphers. One is DES. One is DES. We're going to do that today and next week. And there's another very important, actually, but now more important block cipher, which is AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, which we're going to do week 3 and 4 of this block cipher, okay? And then we do lecture number 5 related to block ciphers, okay? Today we start with block ciphers. Okay, so what we want to start with an introduction. What is this? And then we want to talk, super, danke, Dejun. Then we want to talk about Feistel networks, whatever that is, and then we want to talk about the real stuff, the internals of DES. Okay. Oh, and I think Dejun told you and put that on Blackboard. This lecture, for whatever reason, we don't have that in German on the internet right now. We do have the video, but it's not online. We can't find the video, to be exact. So right now we only have the English lecture. The German lecture will go online. We're still hopeful that we find it. So we start with introduction to the data encryption standard, which is usually referred to as DES. Okay. A few facts. Ein paar Fakten. We try to be like a little bit practical and also to motivate you. And I think cryptography is such a young field. It's kind of important to view that in all this crypto development in a context. So what happened historically? The DES was proposed 1974, so it's not. It's a little older than most of you here in the audience. It's a little younger than me, okay? So it was proposed by IBM Research in Yorktown Heights. That's about 80 kilometers north of New York City. With, interestingly, very interestingly, with input from our favorite intelligence agency, the national NSA. Okay. What is very important, and if you, oh, actually, by the way, we got the first few books. We didn't get all the 200 books, but we got the first 20 a few days ago. I don't know why. So the books should be here soon. You should read the introductory chapter of the book. It's like 1.5 pages about the history. It's quite interesting. In particular, what's relevant, up to that point in time, there was no real cryptography out in the public space. You know, all cryptography that was being done was done by the Geheimdienste, you know, the intelligence services. And that was very interesting that the US government asked for a standard. So this was in a request by the US government. The US government said, who can build us a standard? And then IBM said, we can. And everything of the development of the cipher was kept secret. The only thing that was not secret was the cipher itself. So in 1974, they came up with this death cipher, exactly what we're going to do the next 90 minutes, okay? But they didn't say how, well, what the details, why it was designed the way it is. You know, they just gave you the cipher. There was no motivation, you know, what key lengths, how the internals were chosen or so. But again, I think the biggest thing back then was that suddenly the US government said, here's a secure crypto algorithm, and before the US government and most other governments didn't even want anybody to use cryptography, okay? So because you know, they wanted to wiretap, to lauschen, right? To listen into communication of other people, okay? So that was a big event in the history of cryptography, that suddenly a big Western government said, here is an encryption standard. Here's a way to encrypt your data securely, okay? So that was happened originally in 74, then a few years later, 3 years later, in 77, from 77 up till 98, you know, within your lifetime, right? You were most of you were going to school at that point. Was a standard, and you have to be a little bit careful. The standard means first of all, it was a standard for the US government. That means if you build some kind of network equipment for the US government, you had to use DES, but it wasn't, most other people could freely choose whether they would use DES or not. And it turned out many commercial applications use DES, okay? And actually so many people use DES that it's the, it has become the best studied cipher in the world. And again, essentially for more than 20 years, close to 30 years, well, at least for 20 years, it was by far the most popular cipher. I don't have any numbers, but I would guess 80 to 90% of the real-world application probably used DES. I'm guessing here. Maybe it was only 60% or something. But it was super popular, and it's still popular. Question to you: who has this new passport, the German passport with the electronic passport? Who has the new one? I don't believe that. Okay, you have one? Oh yeah, but an electronic one? Okay. Nobody else here? Yeah, one person. I mean, they've been issuing them for 2 years. Okay, okay. So 2 people. You know the German Personalausweis, the new citizen card, which they started 18 days ago. Are you aware of that? There's a new Personalausweis. Both the Personalausweis and the e-passport have DES on board. Okay. Have DES on board, so it's still out there. Actually, not plain DES, but triple DES, okay? The question is, maybe to follow up here, normal DES is unsecured today. The key is too short here. So the question is, why is that on the German passport? But triple DES is very secure. What is triple DES? You simply, if you want to encrypt, you're not encrypting once, but twice and 3 times. So if you have your email, and every block of your email, if you encrypt it 3 times in a row, you get something very, very secure that's in the e-passport. Okay. So, and that's, people are still using that. What else? Okay. And now what I want to do with you, I want to explain how DES works. Okay. And we start kind of in a layered approach. So we start from a very high abstract level, and then we drill further and further down. And later we, down to the bit level, we're inside the algorithm. On an extremely high level, DES is something very, very simple. You have your encryption function here, DES. You go in with your plain text, you get your ciphertext out, and there's a key, right? This is, this Alice and Bob setting, right? You need an encryption function, okay? It's a block cipher, it's not a stream cipher. If you look up there, what we did with block cipher, with stream cipher, we encrypted individual bits. What you do with block ciphers, well, surprise, surprise, you encrypt blocks of data. Namely, in the case of DES, 8 bytes at a time. That means 64 bits. Okay? So you're not putting in 1 bit and say, please encrypt. This is what a stream cipher does, but you give in 64 bits and you say, please encrypt. Okay? What the block cipher gives you, what DES gives you after it's done, it gives you 64 bits of output. 8 bytes in, 8 byte out. Very, very simple. Another very important parameter, probably more important than the block length, is the key size. And DES has 56 bits, and we're going to talk a lot about 56 bits, particularly next week. Next week we talk about the security of DES, okay? So now the question might arise, okay, we want to build a block cipher like this. This is the I/O description, very abstract. How do we do that? What do we put inside? What's a good way of building block ciphers? Okay. Question. How do we build a block cipher? Okay. And building ciphers is sometimes more an art, more a Kunst than a science. Mehr eine Kunst als eine Wissenschaft. Okay. But what is very helpful is Claude Shannon, he was the inventor of information theory in the late 40s. You're going to hear more about it. Does anyone know the name Claude Shannon? Shannon theory. Very good. About half of the class. So he's really important for communication technology, information theory. But he also did some work on cryptography. And in, I think it was 48, 49, he said, well, the details, how to build a block cipher is pretty difficult. That's kind of the art part. But there are 2 general principles. Okay, there are 2 principles how to build a good block cipher. He defined 2 atomic operations, or basic. Atomic is maybe a little bit too ambitious. So some basic operations that each block cipher should perform, namely, the first one is I, or 1, or A, or B, or alpha. So the first is it's called confusion. And what is confusion in this block cipher context? Confusion is relationship between plain and ciphertext is obscured or hidden. Okay. Example is a substitution table. Okay, what do I mean by substitution table? Typically, you have some kind of internal signal. This is a table here. You have a lookup table. You have entries, numbers, these are binary entries, they're 0 and 1s. And so what happens is you have some input, and every input picks a certain address here, certain row, certain Zeile, and then you output what you see there, okay? That's a lookup table. It's all the, the baby ciphers we did in the first 2 lectures, the Caesar cipher, the substitution cipher. These were purely confusion elements, right? You replace the letter A by the letter D, right? You could do that as a table with 26 entries, right? For a certain input, you get a certain output. It's a fancy word for that is substitution table or lookup table. Okay, so that's the first thing where Claude Shannon said, well, that's a good idea, good thing to do if you want to build a strong cipher. But he said this is not enough. Which is not surprising to us because we know the Caesar cipher by itself is not strong. He said you should also do something else, which is called diffusion. The influence of one of each plain text bit is spread over many ciphertext bits, okay? Example for that is a permutation, and we're going to talk a lot about permutations today, so I don't want to explain that in more detail, but what is important, this talks about confusion and diffusion in terms of atomic operations, small internal operations. What you want to have in the end, combine confusion and diffusion many times to build a strong block cipher. What do I mean by that? That means when we start the Caesar cipher, the substitution cipher, this old hand ciphers, they only did confusion. Now, what we just learned is another principle. Don't do only replacement, only substitution. Also do this diffusion, whatever that is. And I'm going to show you something in 1 minute and you get more of a feeling. But then what you should really do, you should not only do one confusion, one diffusion step, but do that many, many, many times in a row. That means you start with your plain text X and you do some you have some confusion element, something like a substitution table. You do some permutation, a diffusion, some diffusion, that's what I wanted to write here. So you do confusion, you do diffusion. Don't stop now, you do that again. So you do again your confusion step. You do again your diffusion step. And at the end, again, you have two of these elements. At the end, you get Y out. You get a ciphertext. Okay? So this whole thing is called a product cipher. This construction principle. So this is a product. It's a product cipher. Okay? Do confusion and diffusion many, many times in a row. And I know by now you have no idea what I'm talking about. This is very high level. In 15 minutes we go into more detail. What is it? How does this look? Okay. What you also do, okay, what you get here, you see that's exactly, on the left-hand side, you see exactly what we just discussed. What you also get is very interesting. You get diffusion property, the spreading out. You also get that on the block cipher level. If you look at the diagram that you see there, you see the line with x1. x1 is blah blah blah, right? It's 1 1 0 1 1 0 1 1, and then we get y1 out, right? Ready with me? Very simple, okay. Now I want to show you what diffusion means on the cipher level, not as atomic building block, but on the cipher level is, now you see x2, the second input, and there's a single bit flip. Do you see that? All the bits are the same except the third one, right? So you have a 1-bit change in the input. What you do not want to have, what would be a bad cipher, is if y2 at the output would only change in 1 bit, okay? What you want to have, you have a bit flip in the beginning, and at the end, you want to have many bit flips. And this is just a very simple baby example, an 8-bit cipher, okay? So that's diffusion on the block cipher level, okay? It's also sometimes called avalanche effect, Lawinen effect. You put in, you do a little change in the input, and then it spreads out over the entire output width, okay? So that's just that you've seen that. Okay. This was already the first part, the first chapter of today's lecture. Introduction to DES. And again, if you have no idea what I'm talking about at this point, this is perfectly fine, okay? This is very abstract principles, confusion, diffusion, what is he talking about? If you feel like that, it's okay, yeah? It's not that you slept or talked to your neighbor. This is okay. Right now it's very abstract what we're doing, okay? Very principle-oriented. So now we want to slowly become much more concrete and want to know how the algorithm works, how this works. And in order to do that, we go one level down. I told you we start with a very high level DES is this, and we want to go, we want to get more into detail. And the next detail level is chapter number 2. It's a Feistel network, or Feistel structure, or Feistel cipher. I call that network. I think it's a little. Many of today's ciphers are Feistel ciphers. But certainly not all ciphers, okay? So what's a Feistel cipher? if you go into more detail, you know, this is exactly what you see on the blackboard too, with Kreide. On the right-hand side and the right-hand side, you see this a little bit in more detail. We say, okay, DES consists of 16 rounds. Okay, you start with an initial permutation, final permutation, whatever that is. This is relatively minor. The important thing is we have 16 encryption rounds, right? Encryption round 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 16, which is probably a good idea because Claude Shannon told us do confusion and diffusion many times in a row. And here we see DES does that in one way or the other. It's a round-based cipher. Okay, so you have one operation, only one round, you know, a little bit encryption. One round does a little bit of encryption. You do that 16 times. Okay, so that's the next detail level. Before we only had this box here. Now we know, okay, you have some operation, which is not that atomic. You have some kind of encryption operation. You do that 16 times in a row. Okay. Kind of in a software flow diagram, it would be more like this, you know, you do some computation, the output is fed back to the input. You do some operation, you do that again, and you do that 16 times, okay? So all of that is not still that exciting. The next slide is going to be very exciting because we look what is inside one of these encryption rounds, okay? Yeah. Oh, yeah. You mean here with this NSA involvement? Is that what you're referring to, or is I don't get your? You're referring to this here? No. This is very this statement here. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. No, there's a misunderstanding. So, I switched to German for 1 minute, okay? So, die Frage ist, wer hier steht obscured. Obscured nicht im Sinne von, wir halten den Algorithmus oder das Verfahren geheim, sondern so im Sinne, genau wie die Cäsar-Chiffre läuft, dass wir wirklich eine Vertauschung machen. Dass also, wenn man nur Input und Output kennt, ist das irgendwie so eine Vertauschung. Und das macht die Cäsar-Chiffre zum Beispiel, ja? Das ist nicht obscured im Sinne von, ich weiß, im Deutschen ist mir mehr obscure, ist mehr so dieses Geheimhalten zum Beispiel von einem Algorithmus. Aber wir reden nicht davon, den Algorithmus geheim zu halten. Hier obscured ist eigentlich Vertauschung. Okay? Good remark. Back to English. So, so again, now we want to know what's inside an encryption round. Okay? And if we know what's happening inside an encryption round, we essentially won. We know how the cipher works, because then you do it 16 times in a row, and that's fine. Now the next slide is going to be very, very exciting. Okay, it's here. And it's here too. Okay, so this is exciting, right? Okay. One way of warning, the next 5 minutes are going to change your life. Now I'm exaggerating. The next 5 minutes you have to be awake, okay? If you sleep, if you talk, if you do YouTube on your laptop, it's like the biggest wasted 90 minutes of your life, okay? It's completely useless coming to this lecture and not paying attention for the next 5 minutes. After that, you can slowly go back to sleep. Please, sunshin, right? Sunshin in Japanese. Concentrate, okay? So, what you see, we have 16 rounds there, right? Round 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 16. So we want to look at one round. What's happening there in one round is, shall I copy that? I'm always hesitating. I think I copy that for you. Okay. So what's happening in one round is you start, first of all, you split your data path, right? You have 64 bits, so this is 32 bits, this is 32 bits. This is easy, right? Dividing by 2. you take your right part, put that into this f function, which is super, super, super important. That's the heart. Yeah, it's something like the heart of this, together with some kind of subkey, an Unterschlüssel, okay, whatever that is, but essentially the key, part of the key, okay? Then this f function gives you an output. The output is XORed with the left-hand side, and then you're almost done. The only thing that you do now, you swap the two sides, vertauschen. That means the right-hand side becomes the left-hand side, and vice versa, okay? So this becomes L1, R1, okay? So this is round 1 of DES, okay? Everybody with me? And now comes the most important question of today. So we go in here, 32 bits, a left half and a right half, okay? And a very simple question, and there's a zero answer. There's only two possibilities to answer that. Which of the two halves are being encrypted in this round? The left-hand side or the right-hand side? The right-hand side. Okay. Who agrees that this is the right-hand side being encrypted? Who is the same opinion? Few of you. And it's perfect because it's wrong, okay? But I hope for that, okay? I hope for that. About 50% I teach that people say the left-hand side. So it seems the right-hand side because we put it in this f function, right? And just told you it's very important, right? But why is not the what is the counter argument? Why is it not the right-hand side? Yeah, oben. So you take the right-hand side, you put that in this really complicated f function, but what do you also do? Well, you just pass it through to the left-hand side, right? So this is anti-encryption, right? So you just take the plain text, you're not encrypting. Okay, so what's left? So which part is being encrypted? There isn't much left. It's the left-hand side, right? Everybody with me? So the left-hand side is being encrypted. Took us a minute, okay? Let's stay with this discussion. How is L0 encrypted? What is the mathematical operation? Do we do a Fourier transform or partial differential equations? No, something really simple. What do we do to L0? What is the operation? Let's look. Oh, what is this? This is a XOR gate, right? That's an X. Did we have XOR gate today? We had XOR gates today, right? Oops. And this is one of the reasons I'm doing stream ciphers. There are other people that teach modern cryptography, modern applied cryptography, that don't teach stream ciphers. It's really helpful at this moment. So L0 is being encrypted with an XOR gate, okay? And then put over here. This is interesting. And we continue with this discussion, okay? So only L0 is encrypted using an XOR operation. Okay. Oh, by the way, all the lines you see here, almost all the lines, are 32 bits except K1 is 48 bits, and we're going to address that in a minute. So it's a bit length. Okay. So, and again, you still have to. We're not there. I mean, this was halbe Miete, okay, half the rent so far, right? We're not there with the discussion of Feistel networks, but this was the first 50%. Lesson learned so far is left-hand side is encrypted, right-hand side is not encrypted. It's encrypted with an XOR gate, okay? So when we look back to stream ciphers or to the one-time pad, what you remember from last week and the week before is it's a really good idea to encrypt if you have plain text coming in here, and if you add something on top of that that is fairly random. You know, if you have some kind of random number that you encrypt with your plain text, you get something that is hopefully secure. It's a good encryption. The extreme case was if you encrypt with the key directly, right? How did we call that? If you not use this key stream generator, but the key directly, then we have the unbreakable cipher. Then we have the very good. Okay. But this, in practice, we say one-time pad is a pain in the neck. The key is too long, blah, 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 blah. Therefore, in practice, we use this here, right? And now, and this is the important thing, that if you only look at one round of a Feistel network, one round of DES, this behaves somewhat like a stream cipher. You have the plaintext coming in, and the output of the F function, those 32 bits at this point here, they can be viewed as the output of a key stream generator, of a pseudo-random mask, eine Maskierungsmaske, 32 bits that you XOR to your plain text. Okay, this is one interpretation of Feistel networks. And now comes the interesting thing, which really helps you understand DES better. We look only at this part here. Okay, so when we rewrite that, we say, okay, here's L0 is coming in with 32 bits. Our key stream generator is essentially this F function here. Okay. The input to the F function is K1, right? So far, this looks very similar to what we've been doing with stream ciphers, right? There's one additional element coming in, namely R0. Okay, let me encrypt. And then this output becomes, how would we call this? Is R1 here, okay? Just give you an idea, what do we have to do if this were a stream cipher? Encryption itself is not sufficient, right? I mean, we need more. I mean, in particular, we need decryption, right? At some point, we have to decrypt. That means we have to undo this here, right? Müssen das Umgekehrte machen, right? We want to get the plain text out again. But how does this work with stream ciphers? What do we do to undo here, to decrypt this operation, to inverse the XOR here? What do we have to do? Very simple principle, namely the same. That's what I want to hear. Very good adjective. The same here. We do exactly the same here. That means at some point, and we don't know the details because this is the beginning of the Feistel network, but at some point in life, in some point of this data, if you want to recover L0, at some point, we don't know where, but we have to do the following, and that's pretty much the only thing you can do here. In order to get L0 out again, at some point later on in the decryption algorithm, you have to take the same F function. Same F function is easy, right? You get that from our book, you get that in Wikipedia. We all know that. We know that since 1974 how the F function works, okay? What you need is the input to the F function. That means you need the key, right? Which is probably not a problem because, it's Alice and Bob have the same key. So if Alice knows K1, probably Bob knows K1, right? This is probably no big deal. The interesting question is, what is the other input here on Alice's side? R0, right? In order to compute these 32 bits here, this output here, Bob has to know R0 as well, okay? And now is the question, does Bob know R0? What do you think? Is there any chances that he knows that? Yeah? Exactly, because it's L1. This is kind of a big picture, very vague, very up. What is big picture? Big picture is großzügig gesehen, ohne Detail betrachtet. We copy R0 over as L1 here, right? That means at the output, L1 is available. So in principle, we could reverse that function because we know K1, we know L1. Yeah. For instance, if you would do this, you say, well, I don't need R0 here because it's not being encrypted. You will never be able to do this operation here at this point, right? That's why we have to copy R0 over. Very good answer, okay? So, what else do we have to do? You know, it's like a Feistel network. It seems we have the whole cipher. Again, what we did so far, we did the first round, but then we do that 16 times. So if we know one round, we know everything, right? So what's really left to do is all this very unpleasant, time-consuming details, okay? So what we really want to do now is what is happening here inside, right? The big thing what's left here is the f function, right? And then some other details. I don't know whether this is already obvious to you, but we need, we have the initial permutation, for instance, and on the right-hand side, this is the thing with the transforms. We have to talk about that, right? But the main thing to warn you, the hard part of what's left to do today is talking about the f function, okay? This mysterious function which generates something like the key stream. And this is already part 3 of the lecture. By the way, you can go back to sleep for 5 minutes. What I'm doing, the next thing is don't talk, but sleep, okay? Now we talk about the details, and they're important details, and they're not so. Don't talk! Don't talk. Sleep is okay. You shouldn't sleep. I'm making a joke here, okay? So, but it's not that super important. And actually, students tell me that repeatedly. It's really good that you tell us, wake up, be aware for 5 minutes. It really helps. So, I'm doing it. So, so now we have to talk about all the details. And we're not doing all the details today, but we do the most important details we do today. Okay? So, so this is chapter number 3. And I called the details, I called that the internals, the Innenleben, right? It's a nicer word in German, the Innenleben of death. How does death look from the inside? And we have whatever 3 or so different levels here. So I start a sub enumeration, which I usually don't do, but I think it's helpful. When you start with the cipher, let's assume your plain text, okay? Your 64 bits, and you're more. Let's just. So you're 64 bits, okay? And you want to be encrypted, and you go to Des and says, "Please encrypt me." The first thing that you encounter is not the round function, and what you see first is this initial permutation. Initial permutation is very often abbreviated as IP, and then you do your 16 rounds, round 1, 2, 3, 4, up to round 16. And at the bottom, you have the final permutation, which is sometimes abbreviated as IP to the -1, which is the inverse. What is this? This is a bit permutation. If you use 2 bits in a little bit kind of electrical engineering viewpoint, you see that this is a simple bit permutation. I'll give you example what IP does. So let's say this is the input word. This is the 64 bits. This is you, right? So what's happening to you? What's happening to the bits? And let's look at bit number 1 and at bit 58. I'm sorry, it's supposed to be an 8 here, and here we would have 64, but let's only look at those 2 bits as examples, okay? So what's happening here is that bit 1 is copied to bit position 40. So if you would do this, if you want to actually build kind of by hand a DES encryptor, you really have to introduce a wire. Wire goes from position 1 to position 40. Okay, it's just it's a cross wiring, right? And then bit 48 is copied to position 1, which is a coincidence here. So this is copied here. Position 1. Okay. So and it's a coincidence. 58 goes to 1 here. So it's some kind of essentially an irregular random permutation. So what you have here, this is permutation IP. And then on the if you do the inverse permutation, exactly the inverse happens. That means bit number 1 is again copied to bit position 58. And bit number 1 is copied to bit 40 is copied to bit position number 1. So this is IP minus 1. Okay. Here's another, it's kind of with 3 bits, you see input bit 1, 2, and 40, where they end up, and then you see the reverse there, okay? That means initial permutation and inverse permutation, they cancel each other, right? If you do first, if you take 64 bits and you first feed it into IP, and then the inverse IP, you get the original data out, okay? So now comes probably the main statement that's important in this context is, why is IP in there? Why do we permutation? And of course, our feeling tells us, well, permutation is probably a good idea to do encryption. So why don't we do permutation in the beginning and the end? And the answer is this is wrong, okay? If you do a simple permutation here, a simple permutation there, and this is publicly known, this is known since 1974. This table, you see this IP table, left and right, this table that you see there is publicly known. This is not a secret, right? And it doesn't make any sense if you just do permutation here and there, because an attacker can reverse that. An attacker, if he knows the input, then it's being permuted, you might as well take this permutation into account. So it doesn't execute. So the big question at this point is, why do we do that here? Okay, why is the permutation in place? And when I started teaching cryptography, I didn't know. People ask me, so why is the IP in there? And what every book said is, it doesn't add to the security. Okay, so why do they put that in? And then a few years later, I think in 1998, I met Don Coppersmith, who is one of the original designer. He's retired by now, but back then he was still working at IBM Research in New York. And I was visiting IBM Research and was having lunch with him, and I said, why did you put IP in? And I was really proud. I was like young cryptographer, and I was this big guy, Mr. Death, right? And he was laughing, and he said, well, it was just electrical engineering reasons, because back then they had problems getting the data in and out to the chip, so they had kind of a built-in cross-wiring anyway, and it was just for practical reason to put that in. They never meant that this, maybe they didn't even mean that this becomes part of the specification, but it was a purely technical electrical engineering reason, so there was nothing related to cryptography in doing that. Okay, yeah?
I heard that they did it because it's very hard to do this in software.
Good.
Very much time.
Right, yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of really good anecdotes around death, right? And this is one of them, and this is wrong. But I heard that many times. It's perfect. I didn't pay her, okay? But time for another anecdote. Okay, so when death came out, I said in the beginning, it was a very important event because again, previously the government didn't want cryptography to be publicly known, and allegedly, and I don't know whether this part of the story is true, allegedly the NSA said, we standardize DES, but DES should only be allowed to use DES in hardware, okay? Which might or might not be true, it could be true. So, and then what people thought, because nobody knew why IP was in here, what then the argument was, okay, this is a very nice operation if you do it in hardware. In hardware, on a chip, an ASIC, an integrated circuit, you can actually do this wiring. And it doesn't cost you anything, it's a little bit of space. There are no gates involved, no AND gates, no XOR gates, so you don't do any computation. That means in hardware, it's for free pretty much. If you want to do that in software, it's complicated, right? In software, essentially you write a loop. In a simple approach is you write a loop and you check what is input bit 1 is at 0 or 1, and then you set output bit 40 to 0 or 1. What is this bit? It's a 0 or 1, and then you set the output bit and so forth. That means in software it's slow, in hardware it's super fast, okay? And then one story is, what people assumed is NSA put this in the beginning and the end to make DES slow in software, and only people who would buy the hardware chip, which are expensive and hard to use, blah, 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 they would get something really fast. It seems almost right, but the problem is these are only 2 permutations. Of course, it slows DES down a little bit in software, but only a tiny bit, okay? In particular, what we will see inside each DES round. This is one. You see this F function inside each DES round. You have 2 permutations. How many rounds do we have? 16. That means the entire DES algorithm consists of 32 permutations anyway, and now they add 1 in the beginning and at the end. So what happens is we go from 32 permutations, and they're all slow in software, we go to 34 permutations. So this doesn't make DES much slower. Everybody with me here? And that's why the story can't be true, okay? Yeah, this is slow, but whether you have 32-bit permutation or 34-bit permutation, it barely matters, right? This is definitely not true. I heard the story before. That doesn't, meine Erklärung macht Sinn? It's not true, okay, so it's and again, and I think, I heard the story from Don in 12 years ago. And I did read that, this argument coming from the hardware side. I read that in some other books. I think by now it's fairly well known. Okay, so maybe one word of warning, because there will be homework assignments, there will be exams at some point in your life dealing with this stuff. Do you see this table, IP full of weird numbers? Okay, they're kind of funny to read. If you look at this IP block, if 58 is the first number, what that means is, if the 58 is the first number in this block, what that means, the 58 talks about input bit number 58, because it's the first number in the table, 58 is mapped to output position number 1. Okay? That's the notation of the table. Yeah, let's leave it at that point. Okay. Yeah. So now if you look back to the, and all the DES tables are written in that way here. Now the interesting thing is, if you look at one of these rounds, again of the DES rounds here, the big thing now we have to address, we want to know how one DES round works. And it's not that we did the high-level description. This was the Feistel network we already did. And this was kind of this analogy, somewhat related to stream ciphers, and we add, we do a adding of a random mask. So what we would like to know, how does the F function look in detail? Okay. So details Details of the f function. And I think I actually copy that. You don't have to copy that. It's on the. You're getting the book anyway soon. So this is the f function. Okay. So what we do now is, but I do want to copy that here on the blackboard. I think it's helpful. So this f function, and what are the inputs that we're using? This input, this f function, if we blow that up, what's inside is what you see up there on the slide, okay? But I copy that here on the blackboard, so it's easier for us to discuss this here. We have the E, which is the expansion box. And you start with this Ri minus 1, and you go in with 32 bits, okay? What you get out is 48 bits. So expandieren, right? We go from 32 to 48. It becomes bigger. It expands. Then, if you look here at the input bit length, you go in with 48 bits of key and 32 bits of R, of data. What we can at this point, what you can do, you can XOR the subkey. You know, before we called that, we looked at round number 1, and now we look at round number I, right? E, Runde E. E equals 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 16. So you do a key XOR, and now the real stuff happens. The most important part is kind of the middle part, namely you do the S boxes. So what you do, you have obviously your 48 bits here, okay? So what you do is you take the first 6 bits, on the left-hand side, you take these 6 bits here, and you put that into a substitution table. Namely substitution table S1. That means it's one very specific substitution. Substitution is a very fancy word for lookup. That's an Ersetzungstabelle. Right? It's just a little table. And this table replaces 6 input bits by 4 output bits. So it's not one-to-one. It's not a one-to-one replacement, right? Because you have more inputs than output bits. This is the first 6 bits, and then you have the next 6 bits and the next 6 bits, and you do that 8 times, okay? And at the end, you have the S box S8, okay, the 8th replacement table. Again, 4 bits, okay? And now you're almost done. So we go in with 48 bits, but after this replacement operation, you have 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4, 32 bits here. And what you do here is just a plain old bit permutation, which is just called the permutation P, and that's the output here. Okay, so if, I don't know, do we have names for that? Do we have a name for that? No. I call that out, okay? So what you have here is out. Is this correct? I think it's correct, yeah. Okay. So, and now what's left to do, there are essentially 4 things that happen into the f function. Oh, by the way, you have to be awake here. I didn't tell you that, okay. At least if you have been sleeping, wake up now. Okay, this is f function is important. You don't want to get that out of the book by yourself. Last row. Hallo, da oben. Ich war gerade im Erzählen, konzentrieren, verlorene Zeit, nicht quatschen, ab jetzt. We have to talk about those 4 elements here, and they're very, very important. You know, this actually the encryption happens here. Okay, encryption happens here. So, and now really we have to talk about, you know, expansion, XOR, S boxes, permutations. These are the 4 things we have to address, and most of them are pretty straightforward, and some of them are not straightforward, particularly the S boxes. Okay, so let's look at this. Is maybe I continue here. So you should continue if you're copying that. You should continue after the drawing, underneath the drawing. So that would be now the expansion box. Okay. What this does, in particular, this provides, if you go back to our kind of the building blocks that we would like to use, this provides confusion. This provides diffusion. Okay. And I think this is, we can good observe here. Okay. So that's the details on the left-hand side of the drawing. So what's happening here? You go in with 32 bits, you go out with 48 bits. So we go from 32 to 48. Okay. Why do we do that? And what E does is really 2 things. Once it's a plain old permutation, but only to a smaller extent. The main thing is it expands from 32 to 48, and while doing that, we get diffusion. Namely, and why is that? Maybe I should shut differently. What's a good strategy to go from 32 to 48 bits? A very simple strategy that Des does at this point is that you take. Oh yeah, this is. Can you see this here? Oh yeah, you can see that. Great. So you take bit number 1, and if you have a plane of permutation, bit number 1 would be connected to bit number 1 or bit number 33 or something, right? Similar to what we did here. That's a plane of permutation here, right? But what we do in the expansion box, and if you do that, obviously, if you go in with 32 bits, you go out with 32 bits, right? Everybody with me? But we want to have 48 bits of output. So what we do here, you take bit 1 and you connect bit 1 to bit position 2, but also to another bit position, and namely pretty far away. And that is no coincidence, that they're not super close together. Bit number 2 is just, this is boring, right? This is langweilig, so it's just connected to here. Number 3 is only connected here. And number 4 now is another bit, which is connected to bit positions, right? 5 and 7. Input bit number 5 is connected to bit number 6, and what is that? 8, okay? And then these 6 and 7 are again boring bits, and number 8 again is connected to 2-bit positions. So the idea is obviously some of the input bits are just connected through, and some other input bits are connected to 2 output positions, okay? First there's the question, how many of the input bits have 1 connection and how many have 2 connections? This is just Kopfrechnen. Yeah, exactly. You know, 16 are connected once, and the other 16 are connected twice. So this is 16 plus 16 plus 16 is 48 output bits. Okay, so half of them are connected once. Is there a question? No, this is like wire. I mean, this is really like. Yeah, I mean, you have here, I mean, in reality, you have a bit coming in, which is either 0 or 1, right? And exactly this value, either 0 or 1, is exactly showing up at this position and at this position. Let's say if bit number 1 is 0, you get a 0, 0 here. If this is 1, you get a 1, 1 here. It means, if again, with wiring, if you wires, is actually physical cross-wiring here. Okay, so the first observation was half of the bits are connected to one out position, the other half are connected to two out positions. Why is that a good idea? Remember what we wanted to have. Sometimes it's, I'm not a big PowerPoint fan, as you can tell, but sometimes it's great. Okay, so remember the thing we wanted to have. We wanted to have a bit flip at one position, and this should somehow spread over the data path, right, over the Datenbus, over the internal state of the algorithm. And this behavior becomes easier with exactly this position, this situation. And an extreme example is bit number 1 here. Look at bit number 1 here. If this bit number 1 flips, if you have a plain old permutation, you only have a bit flip at one other output position. But now with this cross-wiring, 2 bits flip here, okay? It's not that exciting, 1 or 2, but it's a little start. And in a few minutes, you will see that it makes in DES, it makes a big difference whether you have only 1 bit flips or 2 bit flips. This is already, we gained a lot, okay? So that means this is a diffusion element, okay? So we're kind of done with that here at this point, okay? So the next thing is the XOR gate, but to be honest, this is too boring. This is too langweilig. I'm not having an extra, I don't write that down. This is plain old XOR here, okay? 48-bit, 48-bit. Now it's getting interesting. Now we talk about the S boxes. Okay. So what you see there, S1 to S8 is exactly what I showed you here, just not as pretty. Okay, the slide is a pretty version of that. Okay, so, and it's worth to talk about that. That's the heart of DS. Okay, it's the central element, the most talked about element, the most crucial, the most important part of DS. And that's what I told you before, wake up. This is really important here. Before we heard that the expansion box provides diffusion, the S box does the other atomic operation, the confusion. Okay, it's the heart of Dash. And provides confusion. Okay. So let's So what this does is you go in with 6 bits, right? Obviously, you see that there's 6-bit inputs. That means maybe it's good to actually draw 6 input lines. You get only 4 bits out here, okay? And this is a lookup table. S reminds us of substitution, replacement. Again, substitution is a really fancy word for just Ersetzung, replacement. Functionally, this is super, super simple, okay? How big, so this is a table. This is just a table. How many table locations do we need? Wie groß muss die Tabelle sein? How many Einträge, how many entries? If you have 6 input bits. Can anyone do the math? I ask you, little tip, okay, to make your life easier the next 40 years, right, as a professional in cryptography, memorize this table, okay? You know, you wake up too early or you can't fall asleep. This is sehr gut, okay. It really helps, okay? 2 to this is 6 input bits, and I saw all these faces. Oh, this is 6, this is 2 times 2. If you have that memorized, you know, like kleines einmal 1, 2 to the 6 is 64, okay? And this will come up in my lecture all the time. Please memorize them. Yeah, you're lying in bed, go through them, okay? Takes you a few weeks, and you're really good at it, okay? So that means this can be viewed as a table, right, with entry number 1, entry number 2, up to entry number 64, and then, you know, it's usually we start counting with 0, so you have 64 memory locations. Each memory location, maybe let's call that S1 here. This is, now we look at this very specific it's the first table, S1, okay? It turns out if you provide the all 0 here, so all 0 input, then the output becomes 1, 1, 0, 0, 4 output bits, okay? This is the output, which, and I've write it here because I want to have a little bit, which is the, which decimal number ist das? Welche Dezimalzahl ist das hier? Das ist 1, 1, 2, 4, 8. 4 and 8 is 12, exactly. Am I right here? Am I right? Now this is wrong. It should be 14, so this should be, there's a 1 here. It's 14. 14 in decimal, okay? That means if this is your input here, 0, 0, 0, 0, your output is 1, 1, 1, 0. So this should be 1. Sometimes I use this English or Dutch ones without the Aufstrich. Okay, so if your input happens to be 63, that means this is in binary 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Your output becomes 1, 1, 0, 1, which is in, what is that in decimal? 8, 4, 12, 13. Yeah, it's a 13 in the decimal system. Okay. Okay, so. And if you're looking, is there some rule behind it? The answer is no, 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 no. The rule is this funny table there. Do you see on the lower left-hand corner, S1? This describes that, okay? And there's a big mystery, and we're going to talk about this funny table for a while, okay? So it's not that it's the input is, first one is always 14, at the end is always 13 or so. I got that out of the table, okay? Now, first of all, for the, I would call that, the way of reading the table is kind of weird. It's very unusual, okay? So there's an unusual decoding of the S-box tables, namely. So first of all, the first thing is that we observe kind of probably the more natural or more human-friendly interpretation was, this is just a list with 64 numbers and we write them, you know, underneath each other or maybe in one row. What we see, they write them in some kind of rectangle, Rechteck, right? There's 64 numbers, I don't know where you get that. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 16 columns, 16 Spalten, and 4 rows. So altogether, this is 4 times 60, 64 numbers in this square, in this rectangle, okay? And here I put them 64 numbers underneath each other, there's a rectangle. So now what we have to do with the 6 input bits, every input bit configuration, each 6-bit word selects one output. And how do we do that? You take 4 of these bits, 4 bits, select one of the columns, einen der Spalten. You see that? There's 16 columns, 16 Spalten. So with 4 bits, you can pick one of the columns. And the remaining bits, pick one of the 1, 2, 3 rows. Okay, that's the idea. Okay, this is all DES standard, all DES literature that I've seen, and I've seen many, many books and internet pages and documents with DES standards. They all write it this way. And here comes the weird thing. Normally, you would expect something like this. The first 4 bits select the column, and then the last 2 bits the row. But this is not how they do it. What they do, this is the input bits. Let's say 6 input bits. You take the middle bits, the 4 bits in the middle, and this is the column select. Spaltenwahl auf Deutsch. Okay, so the 4 bits select which of the 16 columns, right? Column, they're enumerated from 0 to 15. Die sind durchnummeriert. 0, 1, 2, 3, up to 15. And they're picked by the middle 4 bits. And then the outer bits, bit number 1, bit number 16, those 2 bits give you the row selection. The row select. What is Zeilenauswahl or Zeilenwahl? What does this mean? Example. We would like to know what happens, what is the S-box value if the input is 37. First of all, you have to get away from this decimal representation, what we're used to think of. DES is heavily binary. So the first thing we have to do is you have to convert that to binary, and it turns out this is 32, this is 32, 16, 8, 4, and 1. Okay? 1 and 4 and 32 is 37. That's a binary representation here. Okay? So what we then have to do is which column, welche Spalte is being selected by this input word. We have to look in here, right? This is a binary 2, right? So that means we are in column, I hope my pointer works. Oh, it works, good. That means we're somewhere here. You see the pointer here? We're somewhere here. We don't know which row, but the row is provided by here. Row is the 1, 1 is the binary, the binary 1, 1 is the decimal 3. That means we are in row number 3. That means we're here, and that means the output is this. Do you see that there? Is the 08. Okay, so the output is what does 08 mean? And this is very confusing. This is what I did here. Of course, you can write them as binary bits. You can write them in decimal. Okay. And do you have any idea what 08 stands for? What is the bit pattern here? That's the 8. So it just takes the 8 and converts the 8 in binary. Okay. Is this very confusing? What's in the table, they're all the numbers starting from 0 up to 15, and this is always Means in the what you have in the table, in the book, and again, pretty much every literature that ever written is not using this binary entry, but always this decimal entry. Because it's easier to write, otherwise this table would be full with zeros and ones, right? So it's just more convenient to write. So, and now comes a really good story. Okay, so you can go back to sleep, but I think it's not important. It will not be on the exam. There will be no homework assignment. But please be quiet. Now comes the exciting. This is just, I think it's one of the best anecdotes of modern cryptography, what's coming now. And again, it's not relevant for the exam, so you can go home or sleep. But if you want to hear a good story, you're at the right point in time. When DES was proposed, what they showed, what was part of the standard is exactly what we've been doing so far. The Feistel networks, the initial permutations, the F function, and people understood pretty quickly how DES works. You know, there were scientists looking at that and investigating. The big question, what they didn't really understand is, where is this table coming from? Okay, and it wasn't only this table. Do we have the other tables? No, they're not on here. This is S1. There's a table S2, S3, S4 up to S8. And all the tables, they look similar and pretty much confusing and pretty random. Okay, and people said, please tell us, why did you choose that table and not a different table? You know, on the million and billions and trillion tables that you could choose. Why these specific 8 tables? And IBM said, because it's secure, trust us. Okay. And people didn't trust IBM. They might have trusted IBM, but people were worried that it wasn't done by IBM alone, but that it was done by IBM together with NSA. And does anyone know why were people worried about that? What is kind of the worst thing that could have happened here? Yeah. So what? Yeah. Yeah. So one said that you can wiretap, so you can still upportion. That is a master key. The more input. So what this is referred to is a backdoor, eine Falltür, eine Hintertür. So what people were worried about, and that's an important discussion because this is still coming up sometimes. So what people were worried about, there's some backdoor, some mathematical backdoor. So there is some very sneaky advanced mathematical trick to break DES, but only IBM and the US government would know that, okay? And of course, you see these randomly looking tables, nobody really knew what the motivation behind that is. And then you asked them, we said, oh, trust us, it's really secure. And they didn't want to give a motivation. What then happened is people tried pretty hard to break DES. And to be honest, in 1977, there weren't that many people doing cryptography. But during the 1980s, it became more and more popular, and more people, more and more scientists, people like me and all the other professors here in Bochum, started doing cryptography, and they really tried to break DES. And even today, if you find a good way of breaking DES, you're world famous, you get your diploma right away, and you get a job, and it's great. You probably get a job without doing much work, okay, and you're really famous, okay? So people tried to break that, and it turned out it's really hard to break, and somehow the S boxes are involved, okay? And then the big thing happened about 15 years later, I think it was 1990, so 16 years afterwards, 2 researchers, Adi Shamir, is the S in RSA, and Eli Biham, two really excellent world-famous scientists from Israel, found a way of breaking DES in principle. Okay, that was called differential cryptanalysis. And they found a way to break that, okay? And this differential cryptanalysis is, heavily depends how good the attack is, depends on how the structure of the S box. That means how these tables are filled, okay? And then was a big event in the crypto. Was probably one of the biggest things that happened in the last 30 years in symmetric cryptography. One of the probably the most powerful attacks that we have nowadays. And Don Coppersmith, I mentioned him before, you know, he was the one person from the original DES team. He said, oh great, it was about time that you discovered the attack. We knew the attack 15 years ago, or probably 18 or 20 years ago, right? And I think they didn't really believe him. They didn't believe that they knew the attack. So now what was left to do, take this attack and try to break DES. And what happened is that this is a very powerful attack. So if you or me sitting down and designing a block cipher without knowing about attack, likelihood is extremely high that you can break that. Okay, that's a very general purpose powerful attack. It turns out that it doesn't work for DES. And why is that? Because the S boxes are particularly chosen so that the attack doesn't succeed. So the S boxes are kind of anti-differential cryptanalysis S boxes, if you wish. Okay, and so and you know, I think by now everybody believes, of course, the IBM team and the story. So IBM and NSA, they knew about the attack, you know, 18 years prior to the research community, you know, prior to the public, really. And why is that then that IBM and NSA didn't give the attack away? What was the reason behind that? How does this? Because yep. What are the other encryption methods by? Exactly. It's a very powerful attack, and they would like to keep this by themselves, right? I mean, this was the height of the Cold War, right? Kalter Krieg. They didn't know how far the KGB or KGB was back then, right? So there was a super powerful attack. It wasn't known to the public. They didn't want to describe this attack, okay? So it was a very powerful tool. So what they did is kind of essentially doing the right thing. They designed their own cipher, secure against this very powerful attack. They didn't tell anybody about the attack, and they could still use that to break Russian ciphers, blah, blah, blah. It turns out the Russians essentially knew the attack too, okay? And they didn't tell anyone, so that. But again, this is a great story, and in particular this 18 years that the NSA was ahead. So, what's left to do, and we're almost through, we need 3 more minutes or so. If you look at the F function, what you have here at the end is a final permutation. And the permutation is again just a cross-wiring. So you go in with 32 bits, you know, bit at a certain location. Here is connected to a bit at another location, but it's 32 to 32, okay? So what I want to do, the last thing, and you don't have to write anything, but you just have to be awake, promise me, okay? I want to do some kind of Gedankenexperiment through this F function. Namely, remember this avalanche effect, this is this diffusion on a system level. That means we have a 1-bit flip, so ein Bit flipped, ein Bit wird umgekippt. And now we want to see what happens at the output. Let's start here. So first assume you have 32 bits, let's say all zeros. So all 0 goes into the F function and something happens, you get a certain output. And now we want to flip one of the input bits, okay? That means maybe the first bit. All the bits stay 0, the first bit flips to 1. What happens? And it's just an intelligent discussion here that I want to have with you. So first, it goes through the expansion box. There are 2 things that can happen, right? If 1 bit flips, well, what can happen in the output here? How many output bits flip? Yeah, either 2 or 1, right? There's a 50-50 chance, as we saw before, okay? And okay, and to keep things easy, let's say 1 bit flips, okay? Then you go through the XOR gate. What happens with the XOR gate? Does anyone know? First, we have the 0 going in. Now we have a 1 going in. What happens at the output of the XOR gate? Does anyone recall that from 2 weeks ago when we talked about the XOR function? The output flips too, no matter what. It doesn't matter what the value of the key bit is here at this point. You know, you have the key bit here. If this flips and the key stays the same, the output flips, definitely. Okay, this is how XOR works. So far, everything is easy. Now comes the interesting part. So you have this 1-bit flip, and you go into the S box, in one of the 8 S boxes here, okay? the S boxes, they have many other properties. One property is being resistance against differential cryptanalysis here. There are many other properties. One property is if one input bit flips, exactly one input bit, at least, mindestens, 2 output bit flips. Okay? At least 2. It could also be that 3 bits flip, or 4 bits. Okay? That means this 1 bit flip, it's guaranteed that you have at least 2 bits flipping here. Okay? So far, it's not that exciting, right? You have 1 bit that changes here, you have 2 bits changing here. It's not that great. But what happens here, now, we have these 4 bits, let's say these 4 bits flip, okay? And it seems pretty local, right, on the left-hand side, pretty local. But then the P box, the permutation P that we haven't really discussed, they make sure these 2 bits, they don't stay in the right-hand corner, but they are put at 2 different locations, geometrically speaking, right, geometrisch. On 2 different locations of this, okay? So now what we have, very roughly speaking, 1 bit changes here, at least 2 bits change here, okay? Remember, if we were lucky and in the E box you found a bit that's connected to 2 bits, you have more bits, but let's say only 2 bits. Now what happens in the next round, actually two rounds later, but the next round where encryption is being active, you go in here, and now you have 2 bits that are different. And again, the same story happens. 2 bits go into the E box. It's getting more and more likely that you get a bit that's connected to 2 output bits. Everybody with me here? Okay. But even if you have bad luck, if it stays, one of the 2 bits that have only 1 output connection, what definitely happens is that now 2 S boxes are involved. Okay. So by now, maybe it's, before it was S1, maybe it's S1 and S5 or something like that. So now we have 2 S boxes with input changes. You have at least 4 bits that are different now. And again, the permutation takes care of the fact that these 4 bits, again, are spread over the data path. Then the next round, this data is active. 4 or 5 or 6 S boxes are active. Okay? So this is the avalanche effect, and that's a metric, this is math, about the how good a block cipher is, how quickly this goes. And I forgot the exact number. I think something like 6 or 7 or 8 after 6 or 7 or 8 rounds, if you have 1 bit flip, no matter where in the input, the whole data path is being affected. Okay? That's it for today. Thank you very much.